In the past decade or so, or maybe more than that, there's been a lot of discussion about free will, about if free will exists. We've seen very famous people, of course, like Sam Harris and some of the new atheists, straight up say that free will does not exist. Of course, as Christians, we definitely believe that free will exists. But what is it that we mean by free will? Do we mean the same thing that Sam Harris is talking about? And if so, what are the issues with that? Or is there another deeper understanding of free will? And I think there is. This is Jonathan Peugeot. Welcome to the Symbolic World. I think that St. Maximus the Confessor talks about free will in a way that is very, very enlightening and can help us understand why free will is important, what free will is, and how can I say this, and how in some ways it can solve some of the issues that the anti-free will advocates talk about. And so, the argument that people like Sam Harris make against free will is that will is always conditioned, it can never be totally free. It is conditioned by circumstances. It's conditioned by your biology. It's conditioned by mental processes that you do not understand, cognitive elements that you do not even have access to. And all of this is feeding into this illusion of choice, right? This illusion that you have choice. Now, one of the things that St. Maximus does is that he distinguishes between two kinds of free will. The first free will, the one that Sam Harris is talking about, is what St. Maximus calls gnomic will. And what he means by gnomic will is the capacity to deliberate, right? And so you have two types of toothpaste in front of you, and you have to decide. You kind of have to deliberate and weigh the pros and the cons, and you kind of have to decide what it is you're going to do. And of course, that happens in all kinds of situations where you look at different options and you have to kind of decide what it is that you're going to choose. And St. Maximus identifies this will within some ways the will of the fall, that it is a will that is necessary in the world of the fall, where you have these problems, and now you have to decide what it is that you're going to do. And I can understand why, in that case, you could say that there is a type of illusion that is related to gnomic will, because like Sam Harris says, if you have to choose between this kind of toothpaste and that kind of toothpaste, it's like you're choosing toothpaste. You're not free. And you've been conditioned by all these kinds of things. And a lot of people have noticed that often you choose something, and then after you've chosen something, you basically justify it in your mind, but that the method by which you reach the choosing is not completely rational, and therefore free will in the way that Sam Harris talks about does not exist. And that's why, of course, advertising works, all these things work, is that, in gnomic will, that is in the capacity to choose between different options, it is possible to influence you even unconsciously, so that when you choose something and you pick something, you have been conditioned to do so, and you don't totally know the reasons why you're doing that. Now, what's interesting is that for St. Maximus, this type of will is actually quite secondary to what true free will is. And understanding what true free will is will help you understand how it relates to all this symbolism stuff that we talk about. So St. Maximus talks about natural will, which is true free will. And this is the capacity we have to move towards the good. That is, that all beings have in them the capacity and the desire to move towards their own good. And at least for humans, we also have the capacity, you could say, to ignore that, at least for some time, to ignore it to some extent, this capacity to move towards the good, and therefore to kind of embroil ourselves in all kinds of problems. Now, once you are able to see the good and to move into the good of something, then you are free. You actually experience free will. And what we mean by free will is different, but it's actually true freedom, which is that a good example. I'm going to give you the example of going up the stairs, right? And so when you're figuring out how to go upstairs, let's say as a child, you're stuck in the world of gnomic will. That is, you're constantly trying to figure out, like, you're weighing the options, like, how do I do this? When I put my hand here, what does it do? You're figuring it out. You're stuck in the contingency, and you've been in some ways, you feel trapped to some extent by all of the elements and all of the multiple things that you could do, or that you don't know what to do, or that you're trying to figure out what's right. But once you learn how to go upstairs, then you actually are free from going upstairs. That is, that because you have entered into the good of what it is you're learning, you don't have to think about it anymore. You don't have to choose anything. You don't have to pick and choose, like how many, how much pressure should I put on my foot in order to go up the stair? How much, you're not doing any of that. You just go upstairs. And therefore, what happens is that you can think of it like as a pyramid, which is that if I'm down at the bottom of the pyramid, I am in some ways a slave of contingency. But as I move up the pyramid and I learn and I kind of enter into the goodness of the thing that I was trapped in before, then I become free from the multiplicity, right? Free from the trap of multiplicity, or the capture that multiplicity can have on us. And so if you understand that, then you can kind of apply it to all kinds of things as well. And so you could say, when I am morally low on the hierarchy of morality, I need to choose. I need to, if I in the store, I have to kind of decide, am I going to steal? Am I not going to steal? Or, and then I have the law, and do I follow the law? Do I not follow the law? There are all of these choices that appear to you. But if you've entered into the goodness, then a lot of the moral quandaries that people ask down here, they just don't appear, because you're not trapped by them, right? You're not trying to figure out, you see this when you're younger, especially, like, what's the limit? What can I do that's not immoral, but that's like right on the limit? What can I, how can I transgress, but not really? There's this type of gnomic decision making that we make. But once you enter into the good of something, then, in some ways, once you could use this language of St. Paul, the language of Scripture, which is that once you enter into the heart, right? Once you have access to the heart, then you don't need the rules. You don't need the law. You're free from the law, because the law is downstream from the good that you're now able to seize and able to embrace. And that, of course, is true freedom, right? That is what free will is. And that is the way that St. Maximus talks about free will. And so what's interesting is that it reframes, of course, the idea of what free will is, and it makes it very different. So in the sense that it's not that the goods are objective. The objective in the sense that the goods are universal. The goods that you follow, they're not like a choice, like two types of toothpaste that you could pick, but rather they kind of impose themselves, right? So you actually submit to the good, and if you do that, then you are free from the contingency. And you see, St. Paul plays with that in his text, where he says, if you free yourselves from sin and you become a slave to God. But by becoming a slave to God, because God is the very highest of all, then you are free from all the contingencies that are downstream. And so you're always, in some ways, even in the idea of free will that St. Maximus would talk about, you're always submitting yourself to something. You're not free in the sense that I can do whatever I want, because what is this what I want thing? There is no what I want that is free. And this is where Sam Harris is right in terms of free will. Like, you're always in this world of contingency. But if you choose the objective, the true goods, then you are, and you submit yourself to them, then you become free. And that is why you can understand how Christian freedom is very different from the type of freedom that you would see in a revolutionary trope, right? The type of freedom that you would see in especially in kind of modern liberation ideas about, liberation theology, or, coming out type of behaviors, or, that all of that idea that to be free, you have to free yourself from stricture. You have to free yourself from the organizational structures that you're in. But actually, it's the opposite of that, is that in some ways, the more you are submitted to these heads, to this thing that bind our world, the more you are free, because, like I said, you don't have to make choices. And, and that even appears in very strange ways. Like, if you have a home where there's strict discipline, what you're going to notice is that your children will be more free, and your relationships in the family will be more free. Obviously, you want strict discipline with love, but when children know exactly what the boundaries are and know exactly why we do the things we do, like what is it that it means for us to sit at the table? What is it that it means, or what are we participating in when we're together as a family? Then you won't be always telling them, like, don't do this, don't do that, you won't be like constantly complaining or trying to catch all of their misbehaviors. And that way, what will happen is that you will experience a kind of freedom, right? You will experience a kind of well-ordered freedom, where it feels like you're not trapped by all kinds of misbehaviors and all kinds and then you actually will have more joy. You'll have more the meaning in your life. Everything will be better once that happens. And that is really the way to understand freedom. And it's very important to be able to see the difference between the two, because there is a mistake that is happening in contemporary world, which is that people mistake transcendence for transgression. And they believe that to transcend something is to transgress it, right? So, to transcend gender is to break the rules of gender. To transcend, our world, we have to, in some ways, transgress what the taboos are. And so the progressive ideal, like the politically progressive ideal, is really confused in that sense, because it's constantly positing progress as increasing transgression and also increasing liberation from social strictures. It's like we don't want any type of moral overlook, or social, something that kind of holds us together in terms of identity and morals. And that way we feel like we're transcending and we're progressing and we're moving towards something that's better. But that is exactly the very opposite of what true freedom is. True freedom is not transgression. True freedom is submission to higher and higher goods. And if you submit to higher and higher goods, what ends up happening is that you are increasingly free. Free, not in the sense that now you don't follow the rules, now you hate your nation, now you can do whatever you want, right? In the sense of sexually or in terms of gender, not at all. You end up submitting to all of these truths all along the way, but you're not a slave to them, because you can see the goodness of them and you participate in their goodness in a higher and higher manner. And so you could say that in that sense, life becomes more effortless, and things you do become more effortless because they are natural, right? They are couched in all of these ascending goods. And so I think it's worth pondering all of this in terms of the idea of free will. And I think that, honestly, St. Maximus's vision of free will in this way is a solution to the problem of free will, even in terms of, cognitive science, or in terms of contemporary philosophy, that it offers a manner to express why Christians believe in free will. But ultimately, in this case, the choice is between life and death. Always. The choice in some ways is between choice and non-choice. The choice, if you choose the things that are below for their own sake, that's the illusion. It's the illusion because what will happen is that you'll be ruled over by those things, right? And everybody kind of knows that. And you could say, someone who is, I don't know, like someone who is stealing from a store is expressing his free will, because he has the choice. He can choose to do good or he can choose to do evil. But if he chooses to do evil, what he's actually doing is that he is destroying his freedom, because now he has to even perceive the store owner as someone he has to protect himself against. He has to hide things. He has to pretend. He has to lie. And all of that will accumulate itself. And then he will become a slave of his action. And his action will start to rule over him, and start to rule over him in the sense that it will legislate his other behaviors, and it will frame the other things that he does. And that person will not be free. And therefore, there's only one, and in every moment of your life, there's really only one choice that is free, and the other is an illusion and is false and will enslave you and make you not free. So it's a very different vision of freedom, but hopefully you can see that it is one which can be fruitful, not only in terms of questions of free choice, but understanding, right, the hierarchy of being itself, this fractal hierarchy of how the body participates in the head, and how the only way for the body to be free is to align itself with the head, and it doesn't deny its existence, but rather it makes it free of the tyranny of the lower spheres, right? The tyranny of the lower passions and all of the lower interests. And so hopefully this was useful. And as a patron video for this month, that it gives you some insight. I thank everybody for your support as usual. You guys make all this happen, and so I really appreciate it. And I will talk to you very soon. Bye-bye.